Well, my father is from Detroit, and it's a place I visited throughout my childhood and my adult life, only about like once or twice a year. And it was a city that I had really fond memories of. I always associated it with sort of like warmth and good food. But the older I got, the more I understood that the majority of the country did not have those associations with Detroit. They had a lot more kind of dire and depressing associations with the city. And I was sort of bothered by that. And then coupled with that, in 2009 when I moved to Iowa City for graduate school, it was the closest I had lived sort of like driving wise to Detroit. And so I would go more often and visit family members. And on one visit, it was the first time no one was living in the house my father grew up in on the east side of the city. And I just really started to think about sort of the legacy of that house, which had always been like the center of like family gatherings and all of the work that my grandparents had sort of undertaken to keep that house, but that the neighborhood had just sort of deteriorated around them, and that bothered me. And so really the book was never, it couldn't have, in my mind, existed in another city. Detroit was a place where I thought the only place in the country a house like that could exist, like a house that is beautiful but it is worthless. Now that I've traveled around, particularly in the Rust Belt and other parts of the country, there's a few other cities where I can see something like that happening. But at the time, for personally, it being about sort of the city that I knew and wanting to give a more like nuanced picture of that city, it had to be Detroit. That's a good question. I think that particularly we're living in a time of sort of like big city change. We're living in a time also, and sort of very politically at this moment, of all of us contending with various sorts of migration, and including sort of like in the country and like immigration from like other countries, and how will we sort of contend with these changes. One of the things that the book does, or that I wanted to explore in the book, especially in the sections in the 40s, was what are the experiences of like a new migrant into a place, and how does migration change like family sort of trajectory and history, and what does a city sort of, what sort of responsibility does the city have in those outcomes? And so one thing that I think, particularly like a city like Seattle, where you guys are certainly experiencing a lot of change just as far as like the landscape of the city and who lives where. Those are questions that people should be asking each other, is like, how are we accommodating newcomers? How are we accommodating change in neighborhoods? How are we still valuing traditions in neighborhoods? And that is something that it's not just particular to one demographic. Yesterday I spent some time in the Central area, Central District, which is a traditionally African-American neighborhood, but is clearly experiencing change. But it's not just one demographic, it's all over. And that is something, I don't want to botch the statistics, but I remember reading on the UNESCO website that there are more people living in cities all over the world now than ever before, and that's only projected to increase like over the next 30 years. And so what does it mean to like live here, and what does home mean, and how does that change as more and more people want to live in spaces like this?